agenda, but I've got my notes from the last meeting that shows the agenda. There he is. Hello, Richard.
I'm sorry I couldn't find that email. I apologize.
It happens to all of us all the time. It does to me.
It's likely my fault most of the time. So I apologize, Richard.
So I sent Betsy an email late last night that she was going to send some updated language on that. And we didn't get it. So she's going to join us today to help us with that. But the agenda says that we're going to, call it to order. We take attendance. Alan's absent. Is anybody else besides Betsy on?
No.
Okay. So I had asked last time if everybody on the committee would review the summary notes that I had made, because Tony wants them to put someplace, on the web page or in the records or something. And we'd never talked about whether my notes are accurate. Did you get a chance to do that, Rich?
These are the notes for the subcommittees that we
Yes,
have.
right. Those ones that we never adopted each time. I found a few typos that I'd like to correct, but
They looked fine to me when I read them over, and I've been looking at them as you've been putting them out. They look okay to me.
Okay, because I was hoping if you saw an omission. So I'm going to make the typos, Liam, and send them over to you.
Okay. And where those are going to go are just on the public facing page.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we were going to, the next item was to review Article 1, 5, and 6 for any final comments and to address any other public submissions.
Mm-hmm.
So my notes show here, I got this together, that we had no recommendations for one at all.
Yep.
And I show under 5 that 502.1 that Betsy submitted some clarification language that we were inclined to go with, but what she had submitted was not as clear as we needed it to be. So help us, Betsy, please.
I'm trying to bring it up. So that's
okay. Take your time.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
What are you trying to bring up? What you sent me?
Yes, what I originally submitted to you guys.
Okay, I maybe can find it quickly for you. Because I had
another meeting, and it's like, well, I got to get off and go to this because I
okay, just let me see.
Discuss it with the group.
Yeah, let me just see if I can't send it right back. Because I have everything that everybody has sent in one place. It's a little unusual for me, but
I have one for 903.9, but I cannot find the one for the budget.
February, oh no, that's voting districts. So February 11th, you sent out a couple. Let's see if this isn't it. Nope, that's not it. It must have come before then, because that's when you sent us all that other stuff.
Oh, right. Well, it might be in the tracker.
It could be in or February 5th.
Yeah,
Nope, it's not. You sent me one, or us, February 5th. It's not there.
I thought I sent it to Liam first. That's why I was looking. I'm not.
I was looking directly from you. You think you forwarded it out, Liam?
Didn't have you guys' email address. The contact sheet only had your phone numbers. So,
okay,
I did not have your, well, I had yours, Annalee, but I didn't have the rest of committee's email.
Yeah,
so I thought that I sent it to.
So I'm looking from the email from Leah.
Oh, what's the section number?
502.1, I believe. That's what my notes that I put together last night show.
I can help. So this was.
I've got it. I just brought it up. 502.1 was the trick.
Now I need to get back to the meeting.
You guys
yay.
Subcommittee 1. That's not right. You're not subcommittee 1, right?
No, 3.
Yeah, so that's part of the confusion. So I sent it as to go to subcommittee 1. So that's why. I knew it was you guys, but I had you guys mixed up. So yeah, we had a long conversation on this, Annalee, and I agree with you guys. It would be good to clean up some of the language around this. I was trying to make it quite as few changes as possible. But, you know, as we discussed, kind of the intent was that there was some confusion this year, and, you know, this may never happen again because this was a COVID year. But there was some confusion this year that about basically when to start the clock of the 60 days because the budget was such a moving target. So we ended up having the town attorney on the line, getting the budget presentation, but really not starting the 60-day clock because we felt like, you know, we'd need the maximum amount of time to have the final vote until we had what we called the first reading. But I didn't want to reference all of that language in here because the way that the council takes up orders is all prescribed in the rules and policies of the council. So it's possible that a future council could change the way they take up orders. It's not likely, but it's possible. So I didn't want to, you know, refer to first read, second read. So just to put out there what I was trying to get across, and I don't think we want to use the language this specific, but is, you know, that the council specifically has to start the 60-day clock with a vote. I don't know that we want to call it 60-day clock. We called it the council acceptance date. I called it that. I hesitate to call it first read, although anyone on the council would know what that meant. Again,
Betsy, when we talked about this on the subcommittee, we
Yep.
understood the concepts, and the only concern that we had, I believe, was the term accept. The accept
Yes.
sounds like approval, and so we had thought that we would say the town council shall determine by 4 votes to receive the town manager's budget, and then use receipt date in the second paragraph in 503.
I like that. I think the only difference on that, yeah, I thought that was a really good point when Annalee told that to me, is I believe the original language does talk about accept, or does it not? I just added a sentence. I didn't strike anything.
It says
It says shall submit.
submission.
And so what we say is they submit, the council receives.
Yeah, I like that.
See, go to 503, the thing Liam has up, the document.
Yep. I like that. Receive. Yep. No, that's perfect. And then I think the only other thing you guys were going to be adding language, because your other concern, Annalee, was about what happens at the end of the 60 days. So, but you guys had your own language that you were going to be adding for that, right? So I see it there. You've got the board shall automatically become the budget for the fiscal year.
That I believe we were going to change that or propose changing it to, if it's doesn't happen within the 60 days, then the existing budget continues.
Except that we were having Liam look into the school budget piece because I think the statute says something different for school budget. Does it not, Liam?
Yeah, so what legal counsel has suggested, again, this is one of the questions I think ultimately, Annalee, the committee will finalize the specific language of the question and they'll be forwarded to legal counsel for response. But the statute, as I understand it, and as legal counsel has conveyed, stipulates that the last budget approved in this form of government, approved by the town council to go to referendum, is the budget that continues until a budget is ultimately validated by the voters. So that's statutory. Again, as it pertains to the school budget. So as Betsy knows, you know, there's a budget, a total budget that's approved. There's a school budget that's approved by the town council, bottom line, to go to voters for approval. That's the budget that will prevail after July 1 until a budget is ultimately validated by the voters. Now, if that gets rejected by referendum, then theoretically it would go back to the Board of Education and Town Council for revision. And then once that is, again, once that revised budget is approved by the Town Council, that's the budget that will continue until, again, ultimately approved by the voters. Does that make
You confuse me, Liam.
Yeah, me too. I'm a little confused.
I mean, we've got two options, right? We either have the last one that was approved at referendum or something submitted by the board.
So
And I thought what you said was it's the last one that's been approved by referendum is the effective budget.
that was my misunderstanding last meeting. What council has what legal counsel has clarified is it's the budget that's approved by the town council to go to the voters. So ultimately, that budget is formed by the school committee, the Board of Education. It's submitted to the council as part of a total municipal budget. That budget is approved by the town council, and then the school budget goes to the voters for validation. That budget last approved by the town council is the one that stays in place after July 1.
And that's only for the school. The town is a different animal.
Theoretically, I believe could be different. Again, we can have that clarified by legal counsel. But Richard, the confusion that I sowed last time was, my understanding was that the budget that was last approved, the prior year's budget approved by the voters the prior year, would be what would maintain in the interim, and that's not true.
But under either case, this language that we have in 503 that you have on the screen is wrong.
Yes.
That is, the budget is presented by the board shall automatically become the budget if it's not approved within 60 days. For the education side, that's just not wrong. That's superseded by state law. So we don't have to do anything with that.
Well,
So I think we ought to fix
or
it.
remove it.
We've got to fix it to be compliant.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it would be, it's always nice to have it compliant, but the law could change next year and we'd have to go back and fix it again. I mean,
But it may not affect the town part, Richard.
It doesn't affect, I'm just talking about the school board now.
Okay.
Well, then it should say in compliance with law, because if people don't research the law but rely on this document, they should be able to rely on this document the best possible, I would think.
Agree.
Well, but is 503, I don't think 503 as constructed right now is problematic, right? I mean, because
Oh, it is, because it says, so
Yes,
it's
it is.
before you're talking about, Liam, you said the one that the town council sends to the voters. This is assuming that the town council, for whatever reason, did not send anything to the voters. So that's what this says. In the event the town council fails to adopt a budget, that would be what goes to the voters within the said 60-day period. So I think that's before what you just referenced in the law.
So again, there are a few different things. As I understand it, there are a few different things happening. What we're talking about in 503 is the council, again, as the process is currently outlined, does not approve or adopt a budget. They do not take action, affirmative action, to approve a budget. In that case, the town manager's budget as submitted to council, which would include a school department portion, is what would go to the voters. And in that instance, I think that would be the budget that would maintain until it's validated by the voters. Essentially, it would take the place of the town council approved budget.
Yeah, but it says even something more, like this doesn't even reference the referendum. If we ever don't have a referendum, this says shall automatically become the budget for the fiscal year. I think that's what people didn't want. I think people wanted that the budget would be the previous year's budget.
And I think that's where the discussion was at the subcommittee level, was
Yes.
what would, again, inaction by the council, what would be the outcome? And I think right now the outcome is the town manager's budget as presented to the council. I think the suggestion is it should revert back to the previous year's approved budget or funding levels.
Because I think some of the issues are check and balance. For those that came in from other people, it's just a check and balance on the process.
And then that's fine with respect to the town part of it. There's no issues there. We can write that way.
Right.
But what you're saying, Liam, is that state law prevents us from doing that for the school budget. That the school
It's
budget
different.
has to go to referendum. No matter what happens, there has to be a referendum. And the question is, what budget goes to referendum? And what you're saying, it's the one that the school board presents to the town manager. And
Or-
if
yeah.
it fails, then what happens is the state law says you then go to some other budget, because you have to have a budget. If it keeps failing and failing, that budget becomes ultimately approved. That doesn't make sense, but that's sort of what you said.
Well,
Maybe it's right.
So again, there are a few different approval things we're talking about. And so just from a pure school budget piece, the town council, again, let's set aside whether the council takes action or not. Let's presume that the council has accepted a budget and that they have approved a budget to go to voters. If that referendum happens after July 1, because there's a delay or because it's been voted down previously, the budget that the town council has approved to go to referendum is what governs in the interim.
And that's fine.
Right.
Now,
Yeah,
but
that's
this
fine.
says what happens if they don't do it.
Yeah, this is what happens if for whatever reason the council fails to approve a budget.
Okay. And again, I think that that's something different. At 60 days from when the council receives the town manager's budget, the question is, do they affirmatively approve a budget, which again, that's the previous time we talked about, or whether they fail to do so. And right now, if they fail to do so, it's the town manager's budget, which would effectively become the town council's budget.
But that's, I mean, that's according to this. What happens under state law? If the town council does not approve the budget, what is it that goes to referendum?
I believe it would be the town manager's budget. And I think the town manager's budget in that iteration would effectively be the council's budget, because
now what happens if that referendum fails? Then the town manager's budget becomes enacted? I mean, if that's the case, why even bother having the vote?
Nope. I think if it fails, then it would need to go back to the elected bodies. Theoretically, I think implied.
It only goes back to the council at that point, and the council decides what to put on that referendum. They can get input from the school budget, but the school presents their budget. The council ultimately decides what goes on the referendum. I mean, the school could say, they want, $100 million. What goes on the referendum is whatever the council decides. Council could say, no, you get 50 million. That's all we're putting on. If that vote fails, it goes back to the council. Not like they won't consult with the board, but then the council will put on, no, you know what, we're only going to put on 40 million this time to try to get it
But
passed.
Betsy, we're not in that scenario, right? We're in the scenario.
No, I know.
where the council
I
hasn't
think that
decided.
all works. I agree with you, Richard. So I think what Liam is saying, it all works, and that's the way it is. I think the dispute or the question is whether we want the charter, if in the unlikely event, very unlikely event that a council doesn't approve a budget, do we want it to go to the budget they received, or do we want it to go to last year's budget? And then I think the question became, if everybody said last year's budget, is that legal from the school standpoint? Or should we just leave it the way it is because it's so unlikely that they won't approve a budget in 60 days?
My understanding is if the budget fails, it's the one that is presented until you continually to vote to accept something else, that you operate under the budget that failed. I had always understood it that way. I know I heard people say something different, but
I think that's right. I think that's what we're saying. The question is whether or not people wanted it changed.
But I don't think we can change it.
Well, no, before we go there, I mean, if we struck "and by the Board of Education," we would be fine, right, with this language. If the council fails to adopt the budget presented by the town manager, then, and we inserted, then the prior year's budget shall become the budget. That's fine. The problem here is that, and then we would have to say, and if they don't approve the Board of Education, then that would otherwise be provided by state law. That's what happens there. So what we have to do if we want to deal with this situation with the prior year's budget is we have to split the two.
Yeah, I was going to suggest this, not dealing with them in the same sentence.
Yeah.
that we have two separate sentences because there's two completely different authorities for how it's done.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to work on 503. We're going to split it. School from town.
And
And
no
then
wonder
it
they
doesn't
had-
still, would you repeat the language that, Richard, you suggested that Betsy liked that solved the problem they had this year?
Well, we would have the two sentences. The first one would read, in the event the town council shall fail to adopt the town budget within 60-day period, the previous year's budget shall automatically become the budget for the fiscal year, period. And then in the event the town council shall fail to adopt the budget as presented by the town manager and the school board for the school department,
Be toward law.
yeah, then we would, otherwise, we would revert to state law. Then the budget shall be as determined by state law.
Well, that still doesn't address Betsy's problem, the date of submission, because you had said something
Well,
about.
that's after that, right? I
the
mean, this is
date-
all, that's fine. We solved that problem
I
already.
understand, but I didn't write all this down for the note. So it's the date of receipt by the council. Is that that was your suggestion to toll the time? Am I right?
In 502.1, it should be the town council shall determine by 4 votes to receive the town manager's budget. And then in 503, in the first sentence, it says the town council shall thereafter review the budget and adopt it with or without change no later than 60 days from the date of receipt.
Now, does that solve your problem, Betsy, where there was
or the date
confusion?
of, it's,
I thought you wanted acceptance by the council to start the
no,
time.
no, 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 no. I
Okay.
like, it's just the receipt, but so that's good. The receipt date approved by 4 members or something,
Well, or the receipt date as specified in 502.1.
yeah,
I mean, that's fine.
receipt date as specified in 502.1. That's perfect.
Yeah,
If I ever start a town, Richard, you're right in my charter.
so, yeah, that I've got notes now that makes that clear.
Perfect. Thank you
I
so
tend not
much.
to write it down till we come to an inclusion, not every option that we talk
Good
about.
thinking.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good.
Well, because otherwise then I have to call people and ask them about my notes to see. So I think that takes care of, oh, you took it off. I didn't take
No.
it off, did I?
No, I did. Did you want me to
Okay.
reshare it?
No, it's okay. It's just, I hit my mouse and it disappeared. So I thought I did it. So
No cause and
then,
effect.
all right. So then we move on to 503. My notes that I put together last night shows the previous year's budget. We also talked about putting forth the language that you suggested, Richard, with the capital plan.
Yep.
I think the committee was unanimous in going with that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's what my notes show in preparing for today.
So quick question, Ellie, did you get the other changes that, oh, you're going to work on the separating the two with
Right.
some language.
I've
Okay, all right,
written them
gotcha.
down
Yeah,
and-
sorry. Yeah,
And
makes
by the
sense.
end of this week, I'm going to
Yeah,
try to
that
get them
makes
out to
sense.
everybody so that Alan can weigh in as well.
Yeah,
Um,
okay, yeah, that makes sense. Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. And then in 6, when I reviewed the spreadsheet, the tracking sheet, one of the suggestions we never talked about was to do more frequent assessments. And I guess that's to address how people felt they were hit really hard by waiting so long in a town like Scarborough. So my understanding is that state law requires that to be done every 10 years. Is that correct, Liam? Or
Believe-
Betsy?
Well, I think there's some truth to that, but I think that we went, I don't know
Longer.
what the penalty is, because I think that Scarborough went longer.
I think
Scarborough
it's-
went
it's
longer.
Triggered, I think it's triggered when the assessed valuation to market value falls below 70%. I think that's what triggers it, but I'd have to go back and check.
I think that,
instead of a time period, huh?
I think there's a suggestion though about an interval. I could be wrong, but I can pull that state statute and find.
Well, I'm feeling that the suggestion that came in, I think it was from one of our committee members, is that it be done more frequent. And I've been told there are some towns that do it every year, but I don't think they do it the way we did it, sending people out to everybody's houses. I think they must have a different method because it took them a year to do that.
One thing you could consider that's sort of an in-between would be to reference in the charter that there has to be an ordinance in place about the frequency and, about a reassessment. And, and so then it would be up to a council to adopt an ordinance. But, if you put in the charter, like, I kind of hesitate to do that only because there, so let's say we have a rapid, well, no, that's a terrible example. But anyway, an ordinance is certainly not as hard to pass as a charter, and it doesn't go to the voters, but it's a thought of a way in between. I could definitely go for it either way, but
Of course, the charters
it
only
does have a
review
huge monetary implication. So, it does, it was weird the way, one of the reasons we didn't do it at 10 years was because that provision in the charter that says anything over 400,000 has to go to the voter. Well, it actually says any capital. So I really don't know how the assessment ended up being something. That's a different topic. I'm sorry, but it failed. So, it went to the voters to spend that money on the reassessment, and the voters said no. That's one of the reasons we didn't have it at 10 years. And then Tom ended up just splitting it into two portions, business and residential, and did it anyway without a referendum. And I wasn't sure that the charter provision applied anyway, because it wasn't a capital expenditure. So,
and even if it was, I think it had violated the intent of the charter because the town's been doing that. They divide everything up and it comes in at 395,000. It seems like a lot of things cost 390,000.
Yeah.
So
and
they
it was
can,
a big impact
so
on
they can avoid the vote. But that's a different section that I hope they get fixed. So it was a suggestion. I think people thought that we waited too long for such a growing town whose assessed value was growing so quickly, and that it hit many, I don't know how many taxpayers pretty hard. Some got relief. I mean, they went down, but so I think we need to talk about it. It was suggested by a committee member. I don't know how many others suggested. I didn't put down the number that suggested that be looked at. So if we did it, of course, this can be changed. This only goes formal every 10 years, but the council can change this anytime it wanted, just as it can change an ordinance. Isn't that right?
What?
The charter. You can make amendments as a council to the charter, just like you can enact ordinances.
No. So we can the council at any time could send a referendum to the voters. Only the voters can change the charter, no matter no matter what process is used to go forward, revision, commission, amendment. The councilors themselves could send an amendment forward at any time. Probably should do so a little more often if there are cleanup issues, just to keep it from being so huge when we do it every 10 years. But no, it always has to go to the voters.
Well, I noticed Leanne is the only name in here that brought that up. Maybe it's not an overriding issue that needs to be commented on, and that the council feels it should be done. They do it by ordinance.
Yeah,
I mean, would that violate the charter the way it's written now?
my preference on this one is just to leave it out and leave it as it is. So much of property taxation in Maine is driven by state law and by cases that are in the courts all the time. I mean, I think if we're going to deal with this, we're really going to have to deal with it very carefully. And I'm just not keen on spending a lot of time on it, given what we've got to do.
Well, if you look at 601 and take the comments that you said into consideration, Richard, that it seems like there might be a trigger, that 70% number that you're talking about
Well,
is addressed in 601.
Yeah, I mean, the state constitution says all property has to be assessed at fair market value. I mean, that's the state constitution. And so then the courts have to determine when you're out of compliance with that. And they've got all sorts of standards that have been, imposed since 1820 probably. And so I think we just, the assessors, they do the job, they handle it pretty well, and you're bound by that general provision. So
I have no passion or heartburn for this. I'm just trying to make sure we address everybody's comments.
So you guys can tell me not to say this because it's out of left field, but the only other thing I could think might be a charter type amendment to address is that if there is a reval, putting a limit on how much someone's tax could be, could go up. Because what happened this time was, it took so long, there's just a whole lot of things that happened and a lot of unevenness. But, if you capped someone's tax increase at, 10%, or, their valuation, you can't tax the valuation, but even that would be really tricky. And I think, a future council or an ordinance, should deal with, we had, people in the lower income of town whose tax went up by 30, 40, 50%.
But you can't do that though. And that's what I'm saying. It's all governed by state. It's fair market value. If whatever that is, that's what you have to pay. And that's why we've got all these provisions for farmland and open space and waterfront property.
I think you're right. It's too complex.
I mean,
You couldn't limit it. It would be in contradiction to what the law wants us to do to even it out for everybody, to say yours is not go up, and that wouldn't work. Because I think the town has mechanisms in place to help people like that.
Well, that's what the circuit breaker at the state level.
The town wanted to do that.
But, I mean, it never handles it well enough. But that's just what we got.
So that I think ends the sections that we had to cover. And so what I'd like to do is put these notes together, send them out in the next day or two so that you and can look it over to see if it reflects what we did today. Give Alan a chance to comment. And then maybe we should schedule another meeting, although that may be challenging with Alan. I could look back at his email on his limitations, but to kind of wrap up our work as a subcommittee.
There were a couple of other things, Annalee, that that have come in from other folks that we took ownership of. I mean, one of them was the issue about prohibiting expenditures for charities.
That's right. You sent the email out. Did you get an answer?
I did, and we asked, what do you mean by donations, and they were fairly clear. They mean cash. So if you want to let the Girl Scouts use the gym at the high school, that's fine. But if the council says we're going to appropriate $50,000 to the Girl Scouts, that's not acceptable. That's their position, and I think that is a bright line, and we can say cash if we want to take that up. So that was the first issue that we have as a second issue.
And Liam was going, I think from memory, you had told us there were only 2 contributions last time.
I believe that's correct. There was a contribution to Project Grace and one other.
Is that cash? The one to Project Grace?
Appropriated through the budget process. Yeah, so it was real dollars.
How do they access that? They voucher that to the town, or does the town transfer that to their account?
I expect that the town would transfer that.
Okay.
I think there were only 2, and they were small amounts, and that was the last budget. I didn't look beyond. And Betsy, I'm not sure if you have any familiarity with through the budget process, any other appropriation the town has made to outside agencies or nonprofits. Project Grace was one, and I think there was just Maybe there was one.
Well, yeah, and Project Grace, does, works really closely hand in hand with the town. So, I
The
guess I
only
see
thing
where
I'd say about Project Grace is I write checks to them or the fuel thing, but they now have expanded outside of Scarborough. And I would have reservations about Scarborough taxpayer money going to charitable causes outside our own town, that town should be funding part of their activities. I've heard comments that as these volunteer groups get annoyed about things, but that happened under the leadership of the director without any consultation with the other people who were involved, that shouldn't have gone out of town, the money. So I don't know what to say about that. I'm a charitable person, but I make my own choices. Do I want the town council to make those choices for me? I don't know, Do I want to be a double dipper? What will I say? Oh, if we're going to put taxpayer money to Project Grace, I'm not going to give private money. I don't know. Those are things people think about.
Yeah, it's worth a discussion for sure. To answer your question, Liam, I don't remember the other one, but I do think it's limited. Project Grace was the only one I remember for sure, and I believe it was like 15K or something like that. And it was this year was related 100% to COVID help. So
there's so much to COVID. I mean, what the town, the school's gotten $4 million or something already for COVID, and we gave them 500,000. I mean, what are they doing with all that money?
Yeah, it's hard to spend, unfortunately,
and not providing education. So, what do you think about that, Richard? You are thoughtful.
Well, I'm somewhat sympathetic. I mean, we run my own company. We have, so shareholders in my company, and we don't give charitable contributions. It's a 501. I mean, our company is a partnership, and our feeling is that people, the owners, when they get their dividends or their returns, if they want to put money into charities, they can do it themselves. So we tend not to do it, but every once in a while we make an exception. One of our clients has a golf tournament, and we think it's good for business to participate in, and we do it. So we're opportunistic on that, but our general view is that if people want to make charitable contributions, they can make it themselves.
Isn't it a little different to say we're going to put a foursome in and we're going to pay the $800 for the entry than just handing over cash? You're getting something in return.
I mean, it is, but ultimately it's the same thing.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sympathetic to the argument that towns shouldn't be giving to charitable contributions to anybody because it's I mean, how do you decide which ones to give? And you get pet charities or charities that are favored and others don't get it. It's a tricky situation. I mean, I'm not sure the charter has to say that. I also trust counselors to make good decisions. So, I'm not pushing for a charter amendment here. I think that the counselors can make their own decisions about what to do. And if we don't like it, you can vote them out.
Of course, sometimes politicians need protection from themselves. So it's publicly popular to say things, to give donations perhaps. And if they could say the charter, I'd love to do it, but the charter prevents me from doing it. Do you know you're frozen, Betsy?
No.
Well, your picture, you're there. Okay, it's just your picture. Okay, I didn't know whether you couldn't talk
Well,
either.
I think, it's, I agree with you, Annalee. I just wonder, you can, I mean, I think one thing that Project Grace does is it's, and I can't speak to going outside of Scarborough because I'm not aware of that, but, I think in some respects, we don't have a social services department that we fund. We have a navigator through the police department now, and then our HR department takes care of some things that folks aren't always aware of. But
well, you're talking about general assistance.
Yeah, but
well, you used to, because I took a young man over there who was out on the street to get him some help, and they helped him with some rent. And I helped him get a job. And
right, yeah. So we do take care of some of that stuff, but I think some of the other, especially with COVID, and we saw like, folks that needed certain things delivered, and, so I don't know. I feel like they kind of act in certain ways, as as a social services arm, to help the town. So, but your point's well taken that, if it could be limited only to a charity that benefits Scarborough or something, I don't know.
But that's a judgment call. Everybody thinks they benefit the
Yeah.
town they live in somehow,
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately it would go to the voters and people would decide. It's just, and I believe, so we haven't really talked about this, but Liam, is your perception that each one of these changes will be a separate vote on the referendum, or
It
is it
has
going
to be.
Yeah. So,
Each section has to be voted on separately, or if we add a new section, because I don't know whether it was the last time or the time before, we had 10 of them and 9 passed and 1 didn't.
and what's the proposal for where this would go?
Well,
It would have to be aligned somewhere in the charter.
it would have to be added
Under
somewhere.
the budget, the budget cannot accept, charitable contributions cannot be reflected in the budget. I mean, I think this is a lot of, there's a lot to do about really very little in the end. And Tom Hall is smart enough, and the town council is smart enough that if they really do want to give money to Project Grace, they can do it in the form of a contract and fee for services. They don't have to make a charitable contribution. So and I'm not sure, where you draw that, how you would draw that line. If we give, I assume that the town buys lots of stuff from folks, some of whom are 501c3 corporations, and they buy services. Now, those aren't charitable contributions, you're buying a service. And I'm guessing that the town and the council would have viewed the payments to Project Grace as purchasing a service. And it wasn't a charitable contribution in the traditional sense of the word charitable contribution. So, I don't think we need to deal with this, quite honestly, in the charter. I think the town is, and the council is smart enough, and they're not going to be bullied. And they don't need the protection of the charter to say we can't do this. That's my opinion.
It is a pretty small amount of money, and I could go either way, could support either point of view. I'm probably leaning more towards no cash charitable contributions of taxpayer dollars, but we could wait till, it's a small issue. We could wait till Alan can have a chance to weigh in. Are you comfortable with that, Richard?
Yeah, I am fine with that. Yep.
So what was the other question? I just read it last night.
And no, that's right. The other issue was the use of public resources to support, let's call it referendum. Sides in referendum, non-political, but sides in referendum. And they suggest that no public resources should be used for that purpose. And that includes personnel time when they're acting in their official capacity. So, Betsy couldn't go out and under her letterhead as a town councilor and advocate for the passing of a budget. She could do it as a private citizen, but she couldn't do it otherwise. And the school committee could not provide, for instance, to a booster group cash or resources like the Xerox machines or whatever else they have. They couldn't provide to a group to support the school budget or some other public issue at referendum. It's tricky to write this stuff. It's very hard to write it in the context of a charter.
That's very tricky because you get. I think an elected official probably you could advocate, so they can't, they're definitely on a town YouTube advocating for the budget. Is that?
Yeah, I said elected official. I meant appointed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean.
Yeah. I think elected officials could still advocate.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're. Yeah.
But I
elected
think they're talking about as individuals, they have First Amendment rights and that they do it under their own email, their own name. If they want to buy an ad, they pay for it, that they don't use town proprietary information such as the newsletter, or that the public doesn't have access to use as well, email lists. I know that was particularly annoying to people, to parents, that when they got emails that were for school only, and then they branched out into other subject matters. The ones, did I hear from thousands? No, but when you run for office and go door to door, you hear all the people's gripes, and they felt they abused the email that was parents provided.
At the federal level, there's the Hatch Act.
Right, you can't do
Which
it.
doesn't do that. And at the state level, there's a law that governs how state employees can participate in public events and what state resources can be spent. But I couldn't find anything that related to towns in this regard in state statutes. So I think the towns have wide latitude, but it's extraordinarily difficult to separate out the actions in official capacity versus the actions as a citizen. I mean, the chief of the fire department sends out, puts an article in the Leader that talks about how old the fire, the pumping unit is and how it needs to be replaced, or how old the fire station is and how it needs to be replaced. I mean, he's acting in his official capacity, but he's also just providing information to voters. And so I think it's really tricky, and I'd be reluctant to put anything like this into the charter. I'd be happier if somehow or another the council could adopt language which mirrors what the state law says for state employees, and then they're covered. I mean,
Well, the part I found tricky in what they wrote is that town officials or elected officials were not prohibited from providing factual information. But when does the factual information move over into advocacy? If that information seems to support getting a new fire truck, for example, because this one's so old, does that become advocacy? And if the information wasn't provided, people would complain, well, we didn't have the facts, you didn't tell us, so I think it's a loser for us to try to put anything in, no matter how you do it, that it's a lose-lose. So I don't know what happened here. It went so dark. I guess, I think your idea to have the council be sensitive to that, and maybe to talk about, there may even be a personnel ordinance. You could ask Liam. Many places I work have a personnel ordinance. Oh, he's being called away for a minute, but they have an ordinance. But but they have personnel policies against using the town's copy machines, emails for political purposes, for personal use, for selling. They don't even allow Girl Scout cookies, all that stuff. They had to stop all that.
Yep.
Because I know when I had a couple of positions with the state, it wasn't uncommon to go up there and see somebody having their Avon products all out on a table, and they're selling them to coworkers. And it's pressure, it's disruptive, to pressure your coworkers to buy Girl Scout cookies from your kid. It makes, so the town could take care of that by personnel ordinance or rules.
Maybe there's something simpler. I don't know. And I haven't thought about this too much, but I don't know that the town council can do much. I mean, there's only limits of what we can do with the school board, because we're not allowed to tell them how to spend their money. And so I think there was an unwritten rule in town that there would not be advocacy money spent. And then the town attorney said, no, they could spend specifically on saying vote yes. And if you are, a person who wants the vote no to win, you have to raise your own money for vote no, and your tax money is being spent for vote yes. So,
The town attorney was okay with that?
The town attorney said that the BOE could do it. So that's why I think it would kind of have to be a charter if you were going to put a stop to it. Plus, like I said, the town council can't really tell the BOE how to spend their money. So I think it's potential. I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer, but it's a potential. You could limit it through the charter, to say that the town cannot take, political position on referendums, either way, yes or no. They can't take I think when you get into resources and personnel, I mean, if you stuck with just money, they can't spend money. I don't know. I don't have the wording. Did they suggest specific wording for this, or?
They did, and we sent them questions to clarify, and they gave us some clarifications.
It's
And what they
awfully
have said
broad.
is, and this is their language, the intent is broad, to prohibit any use of school or town resources for the purpose of advocating for a particular outcome of any election. So, I mean, that's what they really want to prevent, and it's
Yeah, well,
reasonable. It's not an unreasonable position, but
no, it's not, so could go forward and figure out what happens at the next level or
Well,
something.
maybe,
I don't know. I'm
again,
sorry, I'm piping in too much. You
where
guys
we
can
don't
be in
where we don't have a strong position either way, I'd like to put that on the agenda for Alan to weigh in on, and then we can decide, do we want to put it forward for the whole group? Is it a big enough issue to do that or not?
Yep.
Is that okay with you, Richard?
yes, it is. I remember we're going to want to hear Alan's perspective on this anyway. So I just wanted to make sure we had it on our list of things to deal with.
I apologize. I had to step out, but I know as I was making my way out of my office, there was some question about whether a personnel ordinance speaks to the issue of political action. And we do have a provision in our personnel ordinance. So again, it's an ordinance that speaks to that political activity. And it is readily available. Do you want me to pull it up?
So
If you want to send it around, because we're getting close to 11. I got to take off at 11 for another
Right,
call.
we have 3 minutes left, so.
But also, does that cover the school board, school
It
personnel
doesn't.
also?
It does not. They may have their separate policy. I can research that in between meetings.
Yeah, I think that
Thanks.
I think they probably do. They used to, unless they took it out. But that still doesn't deal with the school board deciding to spend $300 on a full page ad or 800, whatever it is, because that applies to employees. So can we pick a tentative date? I'm just gonna, that's my cell phone. Hold on. It's one of those numbers about my social security. I think that's what they call about every day. That it's been compromised. So let's pick a date, and then subject to review by Alan. He's generally been available, what day of the weeks have we had these before? Let me look at my notes.
Tuesday and Wednesday.
All right, so that's because that's been the best for him.
Yeah.
Let's try a Wednesday, because Monday, Tuesday is one of the 2 dates. I think he told me he visits his mom. Take care of her.
Next Wednesday is good for me pretty much any time, Emily.
All right, I'm just looking at my calendar. Oh gosh, we're into March. Yeah, next Wednesday is open for me. What about this time? What about you, Liam?
I can make that work. Yep.
So that would be March
3rd at 10 o'clock.
March 3rd at 10 o'clock, subject to Alan being agreeable or available.
Yep.
And just one quick piece. I know that there are 2 other things that were allocated to the subcommittee at the last meeting that were Handley
Right.
contributions. One was around collective bargaining agreements requiring approval, and then also some subjects of public comment. So again, we can probably, I think the chair.
Did you see my note, Liam, to them for clarifications on that? Let's wait until we get back something from them, but we can probably deal with it next Wednesday.
Okay.
Both of those questions?
Yes.
Okay, because I had just some personal experience with what can be done and what can't be done. So that's why I offered for this committee
Sure.
to take it. And then what happened that generated this. And I do have three, to a very specific narrow question, three legal opinions from labor attorneys that I work with. That's on the collective bargaining thing that I promised not to quote because I didn't pay for their advice. It was a friendly written advice, however. So,
Not a legal opinion unless you pay for it, right?
Yep.
well, they
Thank you for
certainly
that.
don't want to be quoted, and because they weren't law firms that work for the town, and there's all those kind of ethical things that they afford to each other. But so we're good. It's 11 o'clock, and hey, thank you, everybody.
Thanks for letting me attend, guys, and
well, it was
join in. I
helpful.
appreciate it. Thank you so
Well,
much.
I read
Bye.
all that information you sent out, and it was really informative. So I appreciate you doing all that research.
Yeah, well, thanks to you guys for all the great work. Really appreciate
All
it.
right. See you next
Bye.
Wednesday, or no, Thursday night.
Thursday night.
Yeah.